Thanks for being here. Thanks again for the introduction. I'm a medical anthropologist working at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services down in D.C. And the majority of my work has focused on the use of narrative to better understand the experience and meaning of acute, chronic, and cancer-related pain, and how people talk about and share stories of pain, illness, and suffering in the context also of survivorship after cancer. The title of this talk, as you see, is Narrating Pain and the Uses of Video Games to Tell Aspirational Stories. First I'll briefly discuss the importance of narrating pain in the lives of those who live with pain and use example from 3 video games and describe how one might leverage the positive benefits of gaming to change and transform stories, those we tell ourselves and those we share with other people. And so I'll begin. I hope my tech works because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, that was wrong. All right, standard disclaimer. This information is not a formal dissemination of information by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We have to put this in. It does not represent the formal position of the agency and does not bind or otherwise obligate or commit the agency to the views that I express here. This is just a little outline and overview. Narrative, thinking, and story, I'll talk a bit about pain, and then narrative and pain, the relationship. 3 video games I'll discuss are about and how they transform story potentially. There's a Phantom Limb pain game, Snow World, which is for burns, and then That Dragon Cancer. And then I'll talk briefly about compassionate solidarity and some future considerations. So I always love quotes, and I'm going to start with one. Everyone has, and it's from one of my favorite writers, David Morris, who writes a lot on narrative and pain and caretaking in the context of Alzheimer's. Everyone has an inherently narrative brain, and narrative is a basic human cognitive activity, and people do not just tell stories, they live in stories. So I'll start by talking a bit about sort of what narrative is and what is thinking and story. And I'm, drawing from, the literature from the fields of philosophy, anthropology, game science, and neuroscience, because they've all contributed to how we think about narrative and how we understand what narrative is, how people think and live and share stories, and some potential applications. But that's a lot to cover, so I'll be brief. Narrative is a powerful form of persuasion that can evoke empathy and pro-social behavior. It can, including compassion and other social behaviors, including social action. It's indispensable to mind and consciousness, to learning to integrate information and reconcile conscious and unconscious thoughts. It models the flow of life, framing how we see ourselves in the past, present, and future, allowing us to share a sense of the passing of time and create and share emotional envelopes that evolve through shared time and story with other people. Narrative does not just exist or arise, it is constructed and triggered by inspirational stories, personal, emotionally, and compelling narratives, facilitate narrative transportation, flow, empathy, and compassion. And what we know from neuroscience, the brain is sort of driven to create stories. Paul Zach's and important work on oxytocin shows that triggered by inspirational stories, the molecule oxytocin affects real-world pro-social behaviors in terms of increased trust, empathy, and in that context, generosity in terms of the donation to strangers. But given all this, what does narrative really have to do with pain? Okay, hope this works. Yes. So pain, like narrative, is a ubiquitous part of human life. It's also a really major public health problem, and it's what I study. Epidemiological studies report that in the States and Europe, approximately 1/5 of the general population lives with and suffers from pain. And when I talk about pain, I'm talking about chronic pain, pain that lasts longer than three or more months. The psychophysiology of pain is not well understood. However, increasingly neuroplasticity and interconnectivity of pain can explain why even small molecular changes at single point mutations can result in large changes at behavior and levels in clinical outcomes. And I'm talking about depression, anxiety, and other features that tend to, and mood states. Over 100 million Americans suffer and continue to suffer from chronic pain. The actual estimated cost to society is between $500 and $635 billion per year. Pain causes significant morbidity. And in the Voices of Pain study, the most recent one, over half of chronic pain patients reported that they feel no control over their pain. More than 3/4 of patients reported, and 77% reported feeling depressed, and 86% reported an inability to get restorative sleep. These challenges all have implications for how people living with pain share these experiences with other people, and also highlights the importance of pain and narrative. And because I like quotes, I'm going to do one more. Whatever pain achieves, it achieves in part through its unshareability. And it ensures this unshareability through its resistance to language. Pain does not simply resist language, but actively destroys it. And that's from a beautiful writer, Elaine Scarry, out of Harvard, a literature professor. And she wrote this in '87 called The Body in Pain, and how pain unmakes and makes the world through language. This quote, and I'm going to go on to pain, and highlights what has been described in the pain literature and in pain narratives of illness, that there's a considerable challenges in managing and treating pain. It can defy language. It's difficult to describe. We use Likert scales from 0 to 10, and they may or may not capture what people actually, how the impact of pain on a life. It's difficult to describe, treat, and it's also difficult to share with others. And this is probably because pain causes some level of a crisis in narrative, since it challenges basic assumptions relating to time, the routine way in which a person projects themselves into the social world, how they engage with others, and the experience of suffering. Suffering is a dimension of personal distress that goes far beyond physical or emotional pain. It is the disruption of perceptions of self and plans for the future, often requiring a fundamental rethinking of a person's self-narrative. In extreme suffering, a person can become disconnected or disengaged from the deepest parts of the self, of who they are, who they were, and what the future holds as this pain persists. And also, as a consequence, it causes a significant amount of biographical disruption in terms of how one would convey that pain to other people. So I'll start now talking about the video games that I'm going to talk about. Video games, I'm suggesting, are a way of expressing and narrating and sharing the experience of pain with other people. Through games, players have the opportunity to co-create alternative narrative spaces, gaining the ability to engage with stories that are challenging yet aspirational, enhancing experiential understandings of empathy and appreciation of real-world experience through play. And so one can leverage the benefits of gaming, including pro-social outcomes such as engagement, reward, immersion, empathy, compassion in real-world settings, and also assess this in real time. So, and gaining this experience is essential for those who live with pain and for those who support them. And so I'm going to talk about these three games. One is called, the first one is a phantom limb pain. It was recently published in The Lancet for the treatment, a non-pharmacological treatment for phantom pain. I'll talk about Snow World, and then I'll briefly talk about that dragon cancer. Because all of these I see as having implication for how we think about narrative and pain. So for the first one, let me phantom limb pain is a debilitating condition for which no effective treatment has been found. A key mechanism thought to contribute to the emergence and maintenance of phantom limb pain is maladaptive brain plasticity, and a wide range of potential treatments for phantom limb pain exist: medical, surgical, biobehavioral, mirror therapy, which target peripheral, spinal, and central mechanisms that are thought to be implicated in the development and maintenance of phantom limb pain. The large number of treatments is a testimony to the enormous challenges in treating this condition, and phantom limb pain after limb loss or acquired amputation is often intractable and disabling in about 1/3 of the patients. So there's a need to develop therapies that can restore representations of the missing limb and alleviate severity and the impact of phantom limb pain. This particular game was developed by Dr. Max Ortiz Catalan. He had like a video, but it goes 5 minutes, so I wanted to be. From Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden. And he developed a novel plasticity-based, non-invasive treatment for phantom limb pain, where phantom motor execution was decoded via machine learning, and visualization of the phantom was accomplished via augmented and virtual reality using serious gaming. So the design of this study, and I hope you can see it because I tried to make it big enough, is a single group clinical trial. The number of patients was small. It was only 14 patients. Their required amputation was between 2 years and 36 years. So it's a wide range of length of time between having the limb removed and treatment. They received 12 sessions of phantom motor execution. So here researchers placed sensors on the patient's stumps to detect nerve signals that would control muscular activity for the missing arm. The sensors fed signals into a computer that decoded and then used them to create an active virtual arm on the computer screen representing the missing limb. Participants also received training on how to use this virtual arm to make so-called phantom movements within the game. Then they drove a virtual car around the racetrack using phantom movements and played another game copying movements on an on-screen arm with movements of their own virtual arms. And so what's exciting about this is Herta Flor is one of the world experts at the University of Mannheim, and she's written a lot about neuroplasticity and pain for intractable phantom limb pain, which has implications for soldiers, people who live in combat situations, but no, there's no one treatment for pain. After 12 sessions, patients show statistically and clinically significant improvements in all metrics of phantom limb pain, and improvements remain 6 months after the last treatment, which is great because that doesn't normally happen. So what are some implications? These technological features overcome previous limitations of plasticity-based treatments, such as mirror therapy, while enhancing patient engagement through gaming. This intervention also used movement patterns from the amputated limb rather than the intact limb, which also advances from previous augmented reality frameworks and interventions. So the next one I'll talk about is Snow World. It's a high-tech game, or that's how they talk about it, which was created by researchers at the University of Washington, Dr. David Patterson and Hunter Hoffman, in collaboration with the Harborview Burn Center. It was the first immersive virtual world designed for reducing pain that was specifically designed to help burn patients. So patients in treatment of burns, whether combat or pediatric, often report reliving their original burn experience during wound care, which has wide implications for mood disorders, anxiety and depression post-treatment. And so Snow World was designed to improve these outcomes. And so they hypothesized that virtual reality would reduce pain by distracting from the pain and by drawing the patient and immersing them in another world, leaving less attentional resources available for pain processing. So how did they do this? The design was a prospective randomized control within subject trial. The setting, as I mentioned, was Harborview at the University of Washington, in a regional level 1 burn center. There's a wide range of participants between the ages of 6 and 65, though most patients were under the age of 18, 77% were under the age of 18. And so the results were wonderful. Snow World decreased patients' pain and the need for strong narcotic medications. It also improved patients' overall rehabilitation and their state of mind and mood. And so the reach for this game goes far beyond pediatric burn pain, as the U.S. military is also collaborating and continues to collaborate with University of Washington to test and continue to test Snow World in the treatment of combat burns in the battlefield injured. And that's happening also at Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland. So this next game is, the people who created it are right there. So I just had to out you all. This is a beautiful and powerful video game created by Ryan and Amy Green and a small team from Numinous Games. The game creators, as I said, are here, and so I'm going to be brief. But That Dragon Cancer is an immersive, narrative, autobiographical video game that retells Joel Green's 4-year fight against cancer, with an emphasis on themes of, I get really emotional with this game, so I just might cry a little bit. So with an emphasis on themes of love, hope, faith in God, and of course loss. So earlier on in this presentation, I said that pain often defies words. And this game provides, I think, a beautiful opportunity to witness, empathize, and to have compassion, feeling frustration with treatments, limitations of life, and providing a perspective of Amy and Ryan's sorrow and struggle. It's a hard game to play. It's beautiful. And this game was designed so the player could enter the experience of many of the highs and low moments of this family journey, leveraging what video games, I think, do best: empathy, immersion, engagement, and a way of understanding this particular life challenge in ways that other mediums, I think, don't, and cannot for this incredibly difficult subject, the loss of a child, and the hope that sharing this experience will help others face, well, we will all face that loss at some point in time. I've worked in pediatric, adult oncology, and in palliative care in the UK, and this game for me, and was also a spiritual narrative of faith in God, and an offering to Him, an honor of the memory of the most precious resource we have. Okay, I just have to do it. The time with a loved one, no matter how short, is very precious and is worthy of remembrance. Oh, I made that through that without crying too much. Okay. So I'll move on to, I guess, my last slide, or last two slides. So now I'll proceed in summary to share some thoughts about some future considerations about compassionate solidarity and also gaming. So I started, and I think throughout the talk, I talked about narrative empathy, and research shows that engaging narratives in video games can increase empathy. We live, survive, thrive, and die in the context of a larger life narrative woven together by personal stories of caring. However, personal identities and storylines often become destabilized, disrupted, and may even break as we live in pain and as we suffer. Games are an increasingly important tool for expressing, narrating, and sharing the experience of pain with other people, and through imaginative engagement, share compassion. Compassion means to suffer with, sharing the distress of another person, to offer assistance, and as such represents a type of resonance. This resonance is amplified in the game space. Such compassion is impossible without empathy. Brain activity studies, neuroscience studies show that brain activity of a person listening to a story become aligned with the person telling the story and by the experience of engagement with the story. And as a consequence, mutual empathy and understanding are enhanced. I talk a bit about biographical repair because I talked about how pain and suffering can disrupt narrative, and they can cause a crisis in narrative, but stories shared are also a source of repair. And narrative is crucial to the process of recognizing and integrating repressed, pain-filled, and alienated selves that suffer. Narrative also can become an important tool to probe, resurrect, and forge new identities within new storylines, and thereby in promoting healing. And any new identity requires a new understanding of self, a self that arises through empathy and in union with others. And that can happen and has happened in the game space. So the last, one of the last points I'll talk about is extended narrative empathy and action. And this is a theory from the field of communication. The person wrote a beautiful paper, Claire, her last name is Dr. Claire, and she's out of Purdue, but it was actually on open defecation, so I didn't take that, I'm not gonna be talking about that part of it, but it was talking about this theory that she was proposing about extended narrative empathy. And so it views life as a living body of interrelated narratives. That can be interpreted in such a way as to connect the stories of humanity, enhancing the knowledge of self and others. At present, many narratives, I think, are limited by certain characteristics that confinement within the study's parameters, and that includes audience. And what I mean is there are an increasing number of pain or illness narratives in the medico-humanities, in popular nonfictions, in online communities where patients and clinicians often share engaging personal stories of loss and gain and share cognitive maps of how to survive an experience. But in many instances, these stories have a limited range and audience because the people who receive and share them are people who are living at that moment in time within an experience. And I think while they're incredibly valuable, and I read many of them, we can do so much more, and games provide one avenue. So games are increasingly other technologies, and I'm talking AI, emotional conversation bots, can enhance the ability to extend narrative and expand an engaging story in multiple directions, and audiences throughout space and time. Through play and practice, players can practice empathy and communicate understandings of others' experiences by checking back, reevaluating a choice and consequences and the impact of actions in real time. Video games and other technology also afford the player opportunities to curate and tailor empathetic experiences, enhancing expertise and experiential learning in real time of how others live in pain and suffer across multiple endpoints. Thus, through practice in the game space, empathy can become more encompassing and immersive as a social practice, allowing for new points of view to emerge and for people to engage in new types of action through play. So this is my last slide. So I like quotes, and so this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Jonathan Safran Foer, who wrote a book called Eating Animals. And everything is possible. Again, we could retell our stories and make them better, more representative, or more aspirational, or we could choose to tell different stories. And the world itself has a chance. Thank you.